Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into a truly disturbing case.
Absolutely.
Today we're looking into Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler.
Oh, this is a rough one.
11 women murdered their bodies, found in and around his home.
Yeah, you know what makes this case especially horrifying?
What's that?
It's the fact that Sal's home was basically a house of horrors.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't just killing people, he was living with their decomposing remains.
It's a level of depravity that's just hard to grasp.
Definitely.
And what's crazy is how long he went undetected.
Right.
Years with women disappearing. A horrible smell in the neighborhood.
It's really unsettling, isn't it?
It is. And, the neighborhood itself played a role, too.
Oh, definitely.
It was densely populated, but also struggling, lots of abandoned buildings.
High crime rate.
Poverty.
Yeah.
It all created an environment where Sowell could operate unnoticed.
And the biases against the victims didn't help either.
So let's go back to trace Sowell's path to becoming a serial killer.
Okay.
Born in East Cleveland in 1959, his early life was far from normal. A home full of dysfunction and abuse. Severe physical abuse, mostly targeting the girls in the family.
And it gets worse. His niece even testified that Sowell began assaulting her when he was just 11.
11 years old.
And she was only 10.
That's just awful.
It really points to a childhood full of violence and trauma, you know?
Unfortunately, a pattern we see in many violent offenders' backgrounds.
Sadly, yeah.
So as disturbing as it is, I have to ask, was he always going to be a monster, or was there a turning point?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can't know for sure, but his time in the Marines might be key.
The Marines.
Yeah, he joined at 18 looking for structure escape.
Makes sense.
And he did, even rose to the rank of sergeant.
Okay.
But that's also when we see a shift in his behavior.
What kind of shift?
Reports of aggression, anger, specifically towards women.
Hmm?
Former comrades even said he bragged about choking women during sex.
Oh, God.
It's like the military training, the discipline mixed with his trauma created this dangerous mix.
A ticking time bomb. And when he left the Marines, things really unraveled.
Oh, yeah.
Alcoholism, strip clubs, increasingly risky criminal behavior.
This wasn't just a troubled guy anymore. This was someone heading down a very dark path.
And that path led him to a truly horrific act. The kidnapping and rape of a pregnant woman in 1989.
Right.
He threatened her life. It was clear his violence was escalating.
This should have been a huge red flag.
Right.
A sign that he was dangerous. He got 15 years for attempted rape.
But looking back, that sentence seems incredibly lenient.
It does, doesn't it, considering the severity of the crime and the obvious danger he posed?
It makes you wonder, what if he'd gotten a longer sentence?
Yeah.
What if there'd been more focus on rehab addressing the roots of his behavior?
Could those 11 women have been saved?
Yeah. It's a question that haunts you.
Definitely.
But his release in 2005 marked the start of one of the darkest chapters in Cleveland's history.
Back to his old neighborhood, Imperial Avenue.
Classified as a Tier 3 sex offender,
Yeah.
but allowed to slip back into a community largely unaware of his past.
And that's where things get even more horrifying.
Between 2007 and 2009, 11 women vanished from the Mount Pleasant neighborhood.
Many struggling with addiction, homelessness.
Their families desperately trying to report them missing.
But often their concerns were ignored.
Dismissed by a system that tragically didn't see their value or the danger lurking in their midst.
Remember that awful smell everyone complained about?
Yeah, I thought it was the sausage factory.
It's almost unbelievable that the real source of those decomposing bodies could be overlooked for so long.
It's beyond comprehension this man was living among death, creating this macabre scene in his own home.
Unbelievable.
I want to understand the victims, their stories, the lives they led before crossing paths with this monster.
It's so important to remember, these women, they weren't just victims. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends.
Yeah.
They had hopes, dreams, struggles, just like anyone else.
Absolutely.
And their lives were cut tragically short. We owe it to them to remember their names.
To acknowledge the impact Sowell's crimes had on their loved ones.
Yes, exactly.
So let's take a moment to honor their memory. Hear their stories. Who were these women?
Well, one of the first victims identified was Tonya Carmichael.
Tonya Carmichael.
She was 53 years old and had a complicated life.
Hmm.
At one point, she had a good career as a medical secretary and bartender, even earned her barber and real estate licenses.
Wow.
But sadly, she struggled with drug addiction.
Yeah.
And that ultimately made her vulnerable to Sowell.
It's heartbreaking to think about the potential she had, the life she could have lived,
Yes.
if not for this predator.
Then there was Crystal Dozier.
Crystal Dozier.
She was the first known victim in Sowell's spree.
Oh.
38 years old, mother of 7.
7 kids.
She battled drug addiction after losing one of her children.
Oh, that's awful.
It's a reminder of how grief hardship can make people susceptible to exploitation.
These women weren't just statistics. They were real people with families who loved them.
Exactly.
It's so important to remember that.
And there's LaShonda Long.
LaShonda Long.
The youngest victim, just 25 years old.
So young.
She was a mother of 3.
3 kids at 25.
Her family described her as strong-willed, sassy, a real fighting spirit.
But even that couldn't protect her from Sowell.
Sadly, no.
These stories are tough to hear, but it's vital that we remember these women as individuals.
Absolutely.
Like not just victims of this horrible crime.
You're right. We can't let their lives be reduced to just another case file.
They deserve to be remembered for who they were.
The lives they lived, the impact they had on those who loved them.
It's also hard to ignore the fact that many of them were struggling with addiction and homelessness.
Right.
Were those factors that made them more vulnerable to Sowell?
Absolutely. Sowell deliberately targeted women on the margins of society.
I see.
He knew their lifestyles, their struggles would make it easier for him to blend in.
To avoid detection.
Exactly. He preyed on those he thought society wouldn't miss.
Those whose disappearances might be attributed to their circumstances rather than foul play.
It's chilling how predators exploit these societal blind spots.
They prey on those they believe are invisible or expendable.
You got it.
And what's even more disturbing is that multiple women reported assaults to the police.
I know.
But their claims were either dismissed or not fully investigated.
It's another example of their vulnerabilities being overlooked.
So were their vulnerabilities just ignored by the system?
Unfortunately, yes. There's a deep societal bias at play.
Bias.
One that labels certain people as less worthy of attention or protection.
That's awful.
It's a dangerous bias, and it allowed Sowell to exploit these women.
To operate with impunity.
Sadly, yes, there was a lack of empathy, a failure to see the humanity of these women.
And the genuine fear of their families.
The case of Vanessa Gay is a prime example.
Vanessa Gay.
She bravely reported that Sowell had attacked her.
Good for her.
But her claims were disregarded by the police.
Unbelievable.
And even Latundra Billups, the survivor whose escape led to Sowell's arrest.
Yeah.
Even she hesitated to report the assault at first.
Why?
She was afraid she wouldn't be taken seriously.
It's tragic on so many levels.
It really is.
Law enforcement failed to connect the dots.
They missed a pattern of disappearances.
And it shows a systemic problem. A failure to address reports of violence against women.
Especially when those women come from marginalized communities.
This is a pattern that needs to be addressed head-on.
I agree.
We need a system where victims feel safe coming forward.
Where they know their voices will be heard and their claims taken seriously.
Absolutely. So, looking at Sowell's life, could any intervention have changed his path?
It's hard to say.
From his abusive childhood to the escalating violence.
There's a clear trajectory of violence in his life. You know,
right.
The domestic violence, the burglary charges, the aggression towards women.
All signs.
It makes you wonder if intervention could have prevented these horrific acts.
If addressing the root causes of his behavior could have made a difference.
It's a question we'll never have the answer to.
We can't change the past, but we can learn from it.
Exactly.
So what can we do to prevent future tragedies?
Yeah. Well, this case highlights the need for a more holistic approach to crime prevention.
Okay.
One that addresses the underlying factors. Poverty, addiction, mental health issues, the cycle of abuse.
It's easy to get caught up in the gruesome details of this case.
Right.
But it's crucial to remember the human cost.
Absolutely.
These women weren't just names on a list.
They were real people with families who loved them.
So what can we do to honor their memory?
To ensure their deaths weren't in vain.
Yeah.
We need to invest in resources, support systems to help people break free from these cycles.
Before they escalate.
Exactly. Before they turn into something as horrible as what happened on Imperial Avenue.
We need to advocate for systemic improvements.
Create a society where vulnerable individuals are truly seen, heard, and protected.
Their stories should push us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society.
To challenge us to do better, to be better.
For ourselves and for each other.
Exactly. This case raises questions about how we address addiction, poverty, and mental health.
Issues that many of Sowell's victims were facing.
We have to remember that, addiction, poverty, mental health,
right.
They're not character flaws. They're complex issues that need real solutions.
Compassionate solutions, too.
Exactly. We need to invest in resources that address the root causes of these problems.
Give people support, opportunities to break free and create better lives for themselves.
That's the goal.
It's about creating a safety net that actually works. Recognizing people's worth their humanity.
And hopefully preventing tragedies like this from happening again.
It just blows my mind that he operated for so long undetected.
Yeah, how is that even possible?
Right.
Well, part of it was Sowell's ability to blend in.
Blend in.
Despite the horrific things he was doing, people described him as a nice guy.
A nice guy.
He had job cert in the military, interacted with his community.
It's like he was hiding in plain sight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He had this normal facade that masked the darkness inside.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
You know, it makes you wonder who you can trust.
It really does.
How easily we can be fooled by appearances.
It speaks to that duality of human nature.
The good and the bad.
That we all have the capacity for both.
And it makes you realize we need to look beyond the surface.
To see that even those who seem harmless can have dark secrets.
And in this case, those secrets were absolutely horrific.
They were.
The brutality of his methods, the strangulations.
It's disturbing.
Most of the time, he used everyday household items.
It speaks to a level of rage, a need for control that's really unsettling.
Strangulation is such a personal form of violence.
It suggests a desire for dominance, power over the victim.
It's not just about taking a life, it's about control in those final moments.
Exactly.
And then there's the fact that he kept the bodies.
Yeah, sometimes even living among them.
It adds another layer of horror to this whole thing.
It goes beyond just killing.
So what does that tell us about his psychological state?
It points to a level of depravity, a lack of remorse that's hard to grasp.
It's hard to even imagine.
This behavior often comes with a dehumanization of the victims.
Dehumanization.
Yeah, serial killers like Sowell, they see their victims as objects. Possessions to be controlled and discarded.
It's terrifying.
The lack of empathy, the inability to see another person's worth.
It's a hallmark of this type of psychopathology.
Definitely.
So, after Sowell's arrest and conviction, there was a lot of anger, a lot of blame.
Understandably so.
The community felt betrayed.
Law enforcement was under scrutiny.
And the families were left with unimaginable loss.
It's a natural response to something so horrific.
Right.
There's a need to understand, to find someone to blame.
And there were systemic failures that contributed to this tragedy.
No doubt.
We talked about the biases against the victims, the missed opportunities for intervention.
Right.
But what about the bigger question?
What's that?
How do we as a society address the issues that make people vulnerable to predators like Sowell?
That's a question we all need to be asking.
It is.
We can't just focus on catching the bad guys.
Right.
We need to address the poverty, the addiction,
Okay.
mental health issues.
All the factors that played a role in this case.
We need to create a safety net that truly supports those who need it.
Empower people to make better choices.
To build safer, more fulfilling lives.
This deep dive into the Anthony Sowell case has been rough.
It has.
Disturbing, eye-opening, and really hard to process at times.
Yeah, definitely.
But for you, the listener, I hope it's a reminder
Of
the complexities of human nature.
Mm.
The darkness that can hide even in ordinary people.
The evil that can exist.
And the systemic failures that can let it grow unchecked.
It's a case that forces us to look in the mirror.
To see our own flaws, our own biases.
To confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society.
And to challenge ourselves to do better.
To be better.
For ourselves and for each other.
To be more vigilant.
To speak up for the marginalized.
To demand justice for those who are silenced.
Remember, knowledge is power.
It is.
By understanding these tragedies, we can make better choices.
Advocate for change.
And hopefully prevent them from happening again.
That's the hope.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay safe.